The residents of the peaceful town of San Jose, more known for its peace than its turbulence, were startled awake by a scandal that would soon engulf all. While her husband, Marcel Vincente, was a highly regarded historian at the town museum, Isabel Vincente was known as a gentle volunteer at the nearby animal shelter. Though under the surface of their apparently perfect marriage, a storm was building in their life. Isabel had always been a devoted wife, but lately her behavior had become erratic. He began arriving late for home, his justifications flimsy and dubious. Isabel became suspicious when she observed he was unduly protective of his phone. Unable to ignore her intuition anymore one evening, she chose to look over his call records. Her heart dropped when she noticed several repeated calls to a number she couldn't identify. Driven by a biting sense of betrayal, Isabel's research started in earnest. One evening, she trailed Marcel to a small, quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. She watched in horror from a discreet corner as Marcel embraced a striking woman with dark hair and piercing green eyes. A friend introduced the woman to Alyssa Heron, a known in limited circles author who had lately relocated to San Jose. Friends, sorry to interrupt, but please subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Let's continue. Devastated by her worst fears confirmed, Isabel confronted Marcel that evening. First, he denied everything, but under the weight of Isabel's charges and proof, he eventually acknowledged the affair. The disclosure rocked Isabel's life and turned her love into seething rage and an insatiable need for retribution. Isabel's grief changed into a cold, deliberate will as the days stretched into weeks. She carefully planned her revenge, keeping her cool under public pressure, all the while scheming the death of her husband's mistress. On a particularly wet night, Isabel's plan was launched. Under the cover of talking about Marcel, she drew Alyssa to a dead section of the forest. Emotions running strong, Isabel faced Alyssa and could feel the tension in the air. Isabel struck Alyssa with a heavy stutzen in a flash of wrath and hopelessness, the effect instantaneous and fatal. Days passed without anyone knowing until a nearby hiking club came upon it. The horrific discovery set the San Jose police on a furious inquiry. Assigned to the case was seasoned investigator known for his exacting standards, Detective Lionel Gavril. Given the attack's violence, the first analysis pointed to a crime of passion. Detective Gavril worked through the riddle using several forensic methods. The team searched the forest for any buried evidence that might clarify the crime using ground-penetrating radar. Thermal imaging enabled ground disturbance detection, so exposing the area where Isabel had hurriedly tried to hide her tracks. Determining the time of death was mostly dependent on forensic anthropology and entomology, which also helped to narrow the window of the night Alyssa vanished. When the detectives found Alyssa's personal belongings at the scene, including a blood-stained manuscript suggesting her affair with Marcel, the inquiry got more intense. Together with witness interviews, this material started to clearly depict the sad love triangle. Isabel started to act quite suspiciously. She avoided questions, turned away attention, and showed symptoms of extreme stress. The turning point came when forensic entomology identified the precise moment of Alyssa's death, coinciding exactly with Isabel's unaccounted time on the murder's evening. Together with Marcel's reluctant admission about the affair, the noose tightened around Isabel. Isabel was hauled in for interrogation after being arrested. Her first denials were finally replaced with a chilly, terrible calmness. Isabel's mask fell apart as Detective Gavril showed the growing proof. Driven by a great sense of betrayal and vengeance, she acknowledged the crime, but her voice lacked regret. San Jose was left in stunned state. The community's center point became Isabel's trial, which exposed the darker side of what once appeared to be a perfect marriage. The inquiry had revealed the raw feelings and terrible choices taken that resulted in Alyssa's early death. The town struggled with the aftermath of a crime that had rocked their peace and revealed the complexity of human emotions and the terrible results of betrayal and retribution, while Isabel sat in her cell, waiting for the trial. The trial of Isabel Vincente started in a quiet courtroom, the air charged with expectation. Once appreciative of Isabel's community work, the San Jose residents were now struggling with her dual nature, a devoted wife turned killer. Drawn to the dramatic elements of the case, the media fervorously reported every detail, so sparking public interest and discussion. Claudia Morati, Isabel's attorney, was a sharp and seasoned litigant. Claudia presented Isabel as a victim of extreme emotional pain, driven to a moment of lunacy, so strengthening her defense. She created a picture of a devoted wife who had been betrayed and embarrassed by her husband's adultery, implying that the crime was more of an act of instinctive wrath than any kind of preparation. Under the tenacious and forceful Samuel Keating, the prosecution offered a quite different story, emphasizing her deliberate steps to entice Alyssa Heron into the forest and the following cover-up effort. Samuel painstakingly described Isabel's actions preceding the murder. He presented proof taken from the crime scene, including forensic analyses and witness comments stressing Isabel's intentional preparation. The forensic entomologist, Dr. Elena Novak, who testified regarding the insect activity on Alyssa's body, pointing out the precise moment of death, presented among the most convincing evidence. This added to Isabel's known location at the time, made little question about her guilt. Ground-penetrating radar data and thermal imaging scans also confirmed the chronology and the exact spot the body was discovered at, so depriving Isabel's defense of much space to operate. Calling Marcel Vincente to the stand, his attitude was one of guilt and grief. Admitting his flaws and expressing great regret, he related his affair with Alyssa. Describing Isabel as ever more withdrawn and secretive, his testimony exposed the tense nature of his marriage with her in the months preceding the murder. Marcel's admission of adultery was a two-edged blade. It highlighted Isabel's motivation, but also made some people sympathetic to her. The courtroom drama sharpened as the trial went on. Claudia Morati tried to raise questions about Isabel's intention by implying that her emotional upheaval had compromised her judgment. She brought in psychologist Dr. Rajiv Patel, who testified on the psychological effects of betrayal and the possibility for a brief loss of control in such circumstances. Dr. Patel detailed how Isabel's confidence had been betrayed, triggering an emotional collapse that resulted in the fatal meeting with Alyssa. The prosecution stayed firm in face of these objections. Samuel Keating's case revolved mostly on Isabel's own confession. He underlined during cross-examination discrepancies in her words and her first attempts to skew the inquiry. Captured during Detective Lionel Gavril's questioning, Isabel's own words presented a startling portrait of her deliberate retribution. The trial peaked when Isabel stood up. Her look was one of a woman past her years, her eyes reflecting a mix of resistance and resignation. She told her version of events, acknowledging the murder, but characterizing it as an unplanned, desperate act. Raw passion permeated her account of the scene. She witnessed Alyssa in the forest and the uncontrollable wrath that followed. The courtroom was quiet, each eye fixed on Isabel as she related the fatal night. The jury was to deliberate on the intricacies of the matter. Unquestionably illegal, Isabel's actions stirred some sympathy, given her emotional condition. Their thoughts were much preoccupied with premeditation, as with the overwhelming proof of her guilt. The jury came back following several tense hours with a guilty of second-degree murder decision. Isabel's sentence honored the mitigating circumstances of her emotional suffering, while yet reflecting the seriousness of her crime. she received a 20-year prison sentence. After 15, she might be paroled. San Jose felt the effects of the trial spreading out around it. Guilt-ridden, Marcel Vicente left town and quit from his post at the museum in search of anonymity and an opportunity to start over. Once a symbol of stability, the Vicente house stood empty and silent, a sharp reminder of the catastrophe that had happened. The community experienced a mix of relief and grief when Isabel was imprisoned. While some saw her as a victim of events outside her control, others saw her as a warning about the terrible force of betrayal. Isabel was left to consider the decisions that had brought her to this point as she started her prison term. Her hopes of a loving marriage had been dashed by adultery and revenge. San Jose gradually went back to her quiet life, but the Vicente case stayed with her as a somber reminder of the sinister undercurrents that might lurk beneath apparently normal existence. Although San Jose was left in a state of communal reflection following the trial, for those personally involved, the scars ran deeper. The narrative of Isabel Vicente was far from finished. Thus, one had to explore the life of the people surrounding her, particularly Alyssa Heron, the woman whose presence had started the sad events. Alyssa Heron was a woman with her own convoluted past, not just a mistress. Born in a small hamlet, Alyssa Bianchi had come from obscurity by pure talent and will. Often reflecting Alyssa's turbulent life events, her works as an author were praised for their emotional depth and vivid narrative. Her recent relocation to San Jose was supposed to be a fresh start, somewhere free from the prying eyes of the city to find inspiration and peace. At a literary festival where Marcel had been invited to discuss historical narratives, Alyssa's path crossed with his. Attending as a guest writer, Alyssa found Marcel's intelligence and charm appealing right away. Their affair started out innocuously, with dinners and protracted discussions about history and art. But driven by Marcel's discontent with his marriage and Alyssa's need for company, their relationship rapidly grew closer. The road Isabel Vicente traveled to the point of no return was one of great personal transformation. Born Isabel Fernandez, she was a woman who gave loyalty and honesty first priority. Her commitment to the animal shelter was evidence of her nurturing quality, a far cry from the horrific deed she would later do. Once a shining example of mutual respect and shared dreams, Isabel and Marcel's marriage started to break under the weight of unspoken resentment and Marcel's increasing adultery. Leading the inquiry, Detective Lionel Gavril was renowned for his sharp intelligence and relentless commitment to justice. Having experience in the field, his methodical approach guaranteed that no element went missed. Among his staff were forensic experts like Dr. Elena Novak, whose entomological knowledge helped to establish Alyssa's death's chronology. Taken together, they assembled the story that resulted in Isabel's conviction. Another important person was Isabel's defense attorney, Claudia Moradi. Claudia was well known for her sympathetic style and for tackling difficult cases. She battled fiercely to show Isabel as a woman, driven to the brink by emotional suffering, since she felt she was naturally good. Though the evidence was overwhelming, Claudia's efforts were crucial in getting Isabel a smaller charge. The model of professionalism was Samuel Keating, the prosecutor. Samuel was resolved to see justice done, sharp-minded and adept in persuasive argumentation. Focusing on Isabel's premeditated nature of behavior, he saw her crime through the prism of cold reason. His unrelenting search of the truth cast Isabel as a cold-blooded person, so negating any story of her being a victim of circumstance. Dealing with the consequences of his actions, Marcel attracted investigation and conjecture. His guilt was evident, and his affair with Alyssa was thought to have started the tragedy. Marcel struggled greatly inside trying to match his actions with the damage they produced. Writing gave him comfort. He recorded his experiences in a memoir that would later offer understanding of the complexity of personal relationships and the terrible consequences of betrayal. The Vincente case also made clear the sometimes disregarded elements of small-town dynamics. With its close-knit community, San Jose started to represent society's judgment and empathy microcosm. Though at first split in their views, the residents eventually came to see the complex nature of the catastrophe. Public attitude was greatly shaped by the local media, which alternated between sensationalism and a more sympathetic presentation of the people engaged. Isabel changed greatly as she was serving her term. Though demanding, the prison setting gave her an opportunity to consider her behavior and pursue atonement. Involved in several rehabilitation programs, Isabel concentrated on counseling and personal development. Moments of introspection and personal development defined her path from a devastated wife to a convicted killer, and last to a woman seeking atonement. Literary legacy of Alyssa Heron persisted. Her books were posthumely honored. Her works revealed fresh layers of meaning for readers, who also often speculated about how her life and untimely death shaped her narrative. Alyssa's family found comfort in her ongoing influence on literature and the life she touched via her words, even as they were grieving her death. The Vincente case stayed a moving chapter in San Jose's history, a reminder of the fine line separating love, betrayal, and the search for justice. This narrative underlined the great influence of individual decisions and the complex network of human emotions that might result in both beauty and tragedy. The echoes of the past persisted, guiding the life of those who remembered and those who grew, learning from the story of Isabel, Marcel, and Alyssa as the town developed. Years went by, but in San Jose, the Vincente case stayed vivid. Now a model inmate, Isabel Vincente had settled into her life behind bars. Both fellow prisoners and staff members of the jail noted her change. Volunteering at the prison's animal therapy program, a tiny mirror of her former life, gave Isabel comfort. Driven by the hope of ultimate parole and a chance to atone, her road of self-redemption was never ending. Guilt weighing him, Marcel Vincente relocated to a far-off town and led a quiet life. Offering an uncompromising view of the complexity of his relationships and the terrible results of his adultery, his memoir, Shattered Reflections, became a bestseller. The book spurred a lot of debate on the human ability for both love and treachery, as well as the sometimes difficult road toward pardon and understanding. Alyssa Heron's memory was honored in San Jose by means of a literary foundation built in her name. Particularly those from difficult backgrounds, the Alyssa Heron Literary Foundation helped budding authors find their voice and publish their stories to the world. Readers were still motivated by her books, and her reputation as a gifted storyteller grew ever more robust. The career of Detective Lionel Gavril took off following the Vincente case. He developed into a sought-after forensic investigator, and others modeled his exacting technique. Still, the Vincente case was a personal milestone, a reminder of the fragility of human feeling and the great influence of his work. He used the case a lot to teach young detectives the value of empathy in their field of work. Claudia Moratti, who had stood up for Isabel, remained a well-known attorney. She argued for better understanding and support systems for people in crisis by handling cases involving emotional trauma and household problems. Claudia's participation in Isabel's case strengthened her will to battle for justice in its most compassionate form. The prosecutor, Samuel Keating, kept his integrity and thoroughness reputation. For him, the Vincente trial was a turning point in his career that emphasized the need of juggling justice with compassion. Often speaking at legal seminars, he emphasized the need of prosecutors considering the larger background of human behavior in their search of justice and shared ideas from the trial. Originally the scene of conflict, the Vincente house was finally purchased by a young couple ignorant of its background. They turned it into a busy house, full of love and laughter. Like San Jose itself, the house started to heal. Its history was a faint echo, eclipsed by the promise of fresh starts. Held 15 years during her sentence, Isabel's parole hearing was much awaited. She came across as a changed person, her years of self-examination and introspection clearly showing in her behavior. Speaking straightforward about her crime, Isabel expressed great guilt and a wish to help society. Her sincere appeal, along with the evidence of people who saw her change, resulted in a strong parole bid. Isabel declined to go back to San Jose after her release. She relocated instead to a nearby town and started working at an animal rescue center. Her life was one of quiet atonement committed to animal care and community service. Her past still loomed large, but Isabel confronted it with fortitude and a will to atone. Though always touched by the Vincente case, San Jose embraced its past as a reminder of the complexity of personal relationships. The collective memory of the town was a tapestry spun with teachings on love, treachery, and forgiveness. It was evidence of both the capacity for change and the ongoing character of the human spirit. The tale of Isabel, Marcel, and Alyssa finally was one of great tragedy and final healing. It underlined the brittle nature of trust, the terrible effects of betrayal, and the long road to atonement. Their lives, entwined with fate and tinged with grief, finally found some sort of peace. Each person added to a better knowledge of the human condition. The lessons of the past stayed deeply rooted in San Jose's collective consciousness as it developed, a reminder that even in the worst of times, there is hope for a fresh start.